Hello, everyone. I want to be respectful of everyone's time, and so we'll go ahead and get started with today's Virtually O'Neill session. I want to welcome you all to the second Virtually O'Neill event, Retooling Your Resume 101. My name is Emily Wilson Gillespie, and I'm the Assistant Director of Alumni Relations at the O'Neill School. We are so glad that you're all with us today. Today's session will be led by the O'Neill School's Chris Schuster and Carrie Lay. Hi, Chris and Carrie. Chris is O'Neill IUPUI's Assistant Director of Career Services, and Carrie is a Career Advisor at O'Neill IUPUI. Virtually O'Neill is our first virtual alumni engagement series, and we encourage you to watch out for upcoming events, including USA Jobs 101 in October and Birding 101 in November. Should you have any ideas for future presentations, or should you yourself be interested in presenting, please reach out to me directly and we can chat a bit more about that. Chris and Carrie will start with the presentation and they will follow up with some time for Q&A. If you have questions, feel free to share those over audio or through the chat. And with that, I want to turn it over to Chris and Carrie.
Thank you, Emily. So as she said, my name is Chris Schuster or Christine Schuster, whichever one is fine with me. So I am the Assistant Director of Career Services at IUPUI, and Carrie is going to share the presentation that we put together for you today, but please do pop in if you have questions throughout our presentation. We are certainly a little bit chatty. We'd love to share with you. So just let us know what questions you have. All right, Carrie, would you like to introduce yourself real quick?
Sure. My name is Carrie Lay. As you know, I am a career advisor. I work very closely with Chris. We see a lot of resumes, so we were talking yesterday that we could probably give this presentation in our sleep. So feel free to ask questions at any point during the presentation. We've kind of broken it up to talk about different sections of the resume and just overall tips for you all. And we're not going to give you any advice that we wouldn't use. So my resume is pieced into this presentation as well. So hopefully that helps you all to use this as well with your resumes. Chris, do you want to start? You want me to start?
Go for it.
Okay. So now that you know a little bit about us, I wanted to go over just some things to consider before you start. If you have a current resume, these are things to just remember as you're putting this together. If you don't have a current resume, these are things to think about before you even start putting it together. Remember that resumes are very subjective, so it should be something that someone can look at and get a pretty good idea of who you are without too much information. It is a professional document, so it's silly. It might sound silly that this is on here, but I feel like some people aren't sure how personal to get with their resume. Remember that is professional and you should stick on the professional side. First person is implied in a resume, so if you have statements that start with I or we or anything like that, you should take those out. And we'll talk about how to put those bullet points together so you're not starting it with a first person adjective. And then we also want you to know that this requires a lot of thought and reflection. A lot of our students and alumni sometimes feel like they can just throw it together really fast and it'll be good to go, when really you should be putting so much time and effort into your resume to make sure it's tailored to the position, that it's tailored to you as a person, and that it really makes you stand out. We also recommend that you have it revised a couple of times, like have some people look at it. It doesn't hurt to have friends or colleagues or career advisors to look at your resume, and the more people that you can get to look at it, the better chance that you'll have to not have any mistakes on that resume as well. Also remember that employers are taking not a lot of time to look at your resume, so make sure you're making it a skimmable document. Paragraphs are really hard to pick information out of on a resume, so that's why we always encourage bullet points. And we say 30 seconds, and that is true. A lot of employers are giving it about 30 seconds, so you want something in there to make them want to look at it a little bit deeper later. They just have so many applications, it's hard to spend a lot of time on individual resumes. And then lastly, a lot of times employers are using computers to scan for keywords. So if you are not tailoring your resume to specific job descriptions, you could have the best experience in the world, you could be the best candidate, but if you don't have the keywords, you are probably not getting through to an interview. So keep that in mind that a computer may be looking at your resume before a human actually does. I'll take this one also, Chris.
Okay.
So let's talk about what employers are really looking for on your resume. Experience in general. So remember that your experience stands out more than maybe your education or specific education might. Your degree is usually just a checkbox that you have it, but they want to know that you have related experience to what they're looking for. Have you done similar things to this job before? Or can you relate some of the skills that you've gained in other experiences to this job? They also want to see leadership. So professional organizations or even non-professional organizations, any kind of leadership role is really important. I always encourage everyone to think about things that you're doing outside of work. So if you're a parent and you're regularly attending PTO meetings or leading meetings like that, that's a really important thing to highlight. So you might consider putting something like that on the resume as well. If you do any kind of consulting projects with companies, maybe freelancing, things like that, that can also go on your resume. Study abroad. Sometimes people think that that doesn't go on your resume, but it absolutely should. That gives you a pretty good leg up with a lot of employers, knowing that you have some kind of experience in other parts of the world. And then again, research with faculty or other kind of research that you've done in undergrad or even in grad school, that's really important to include on there. So I included this little visual as well. So make sure that the experiences are relevant to the position. You don't have to put everything that you've ever done on a resume, and you absolutely should not do that. You should probably include the things that are transferable to that position that you're applying for. You also want to make sure that you're highlighting skills and accomplishments, not just job duties. If you just tell them the job duty, that's not necessarily highlighting anything special about you. And then once again, make sure you tailor that to the specific job that you're applying for. So that's going to take the most amount of work, is determining what keywords and specific skills you bring for that specific job when you're tailoring your resume. So we'll start talking about sections. First, do you want to talk about generally what all the sections of a resume are?
I certainly can, if you would like to. So the sections of a resume, first of all, there's probably things that you are expecting to see on there. So please make sure you have contact information and make sure it is correct. I am going to confess that I once forgot to update my phone number and nearly missed a job for it. So don't be me. But I learned my lesson. So make sure it is current. Also make sure that the email address that you're using is professional. I have seen some very interesting emails. You know, it's wonderful to be a mom, but having your email be mom of 4, which is actually one I had before, suggests you might miss a lot of work. So keep that in mind. Ideally, it's going to be just your name. Your education definitely belongs on there. And I know we talked a little bit about education. I put something in the chat. Think also about the projects and the research that you've done and how that might be relevant to the job, because that stuff is really important, which is why we have that on here. But yeah, those can certainly be things that can have transferable skills or direct knowledge in the field that you are interested in. Of course, you should have your employment experiences. I always love to add on that your part-time work is still super valuable. So if it's part-time or if it's not in your industry, that does not mean it should stay off your resume. It just means that you need to help the employer see why that's going to be valuable to them. There are definitely transferable skills inside of, I would be very hard pressed to find a job that you cannot find a transferable skill. I should say that. It's possible, it's out there. I would struggle to find that. Volunteer work can be super valuable. There are certain industries that really value it, particularly anybody who's really interested in the environmental side, sustainability. They thrive on volunteer work and they expect to see you doing that kind of thing. But of course, other organization work that you might be doing, maybe you're a part of professional associations, something like that, and awards, honors, activities. And you'll see that objective or summary statements are not recommended. Now, of course, as alumni, there might be a bit of a caveat. So sometimes you come back to school because you're looking to make a transition of industry. So that's where a summary statement can be helpful if they're going to look at your resume and be like, what the heck is this person doing in front of me? Sometimes that can help you explain that. But a general objective statement is usually pretty much fluffy words that don't say much about what you're actually about. So we really recommend either doing that summary statement if you're making a transition or you have something further to explain, or just leave that for your cover letter.
Yes, and remember that paragraphs are really hard to get information out of, so keep it brief if you can. I saw a question in the chat about contact information on the resume. So there's a couple of options that you have if you feel like there's not enough space for all of your contact information. You can include bare minimum your name, email, and phone number, and that will keep you pretty well at 2 lines on your resume, which is definitely recommended. And I mean, location is not necessarily needed. So I could take Greenwood, Indiana off of the title of my resume. You could also move it into 1 line, like the second option here. You can see they have their LinkedIn, phone number, email, address, all that kind of stuff, all in 1 line. So I would say even if you do have a longer resume and you're crunched for space, keep the contact information on there. It doesn't need to take up too much space though. It should stand out. That should be something that's like your name should be the biggest thing on the resume, but 2 lines is probably fine to include all of your contact information in. And if you're already going on to the second page, it won't save you that much additional space. So I think Chris covered this really well. Like I said, bare minimum name and email and phone number so they have some way to reach you. And a helpful tip if you're also working on cover letters that I like to give, I just copy and paste my exact heading from my resume and also use it on my cover letter. So that way they look a little bit more formalized and like they go together if they were ever to be printed and misplaced. Sometimes that happens. But it's a nice way to kind of keep your documents looking similar.
It's like making your own personal header.
Yes.
That's what I like to call it.
Yep.
And I did want to add on the address because I have people who put their full street address all the time. And a lot of students that I've talked to them about it are very happy when I tell them you don't have to do that, especially if you're posting it publicly. They don't need to know exactly where you are. So don't worry about doing that. Just make sure email and phone number for sure.
Yes. And a little note about the LinkedIn, you don't have to include that on your resume, but if you have done work on your LinkedIn and it is up to date, go ahead and include it. You can change the URL of your LinkedIn. So you'll notice Jake Jaguar has his kind of like personalized. That is an option for you to do on LinkedIn. So I would recommend doing that before including it on the resume. And don't include it if you have not updated the LinkedIn. That's not necessarily helpful to the employer. So make sure you update it all if you're going to include it on the resume. So let's talk about the education section and how that might look. So you want to include the university, obviously, and the location, similar to how you would in an experience section. And I put this example up here because a lot of our students, especially at IUPUI, kind of get confused on how they are supposed to put the education on there. Since you're not receiving a degree from IUPUI, you're receiving an IU degree. You're a student at Indiana University. So that's why I have it kind of highlighted Indiana University, O'Neill School of Public Affairs, and then just highlight that you're in Indianapolis. If you're a Bloomington graduate, obviously you'd put Bloomington, Indiana instead of Indianapolis. It would be the same otherwise. Make sure that you type out your actual degree. A lot of times people will just include bachelor's criminal justice or something like that. Make sure you double check your transcripts of the actual degree that you're getting and include that full title in there. So Bachelor of Science in Criminal Justice or Bachelor of Science in Public Affairs. And then put your major after that. If you have minors or certificates or anything in addition to that, I usually just recommend make a new line and include that with your major as well. GPA is not required, so don't feel like you have to include your GPA on here. Usually if it's below a 3.0, we don't recommend including it. But if it's above that and you want them to know about it, great, go ahead and include it. And double check spelling also. O'Neill is one of those things that can be misspelled often. So just make sure you're checking that spelling so that you're not turning in your resume to an O'Neill alum who notices that right off the bat. Chris, would you add anything to this education section?
So we had a question that came in about someone who graduated a while ago and whether Dean's List would be applicable to include. So I thought we could just address that real quick. It certainly is something you can include, but I would encourage you to think about what is going to be the most impactful information. So something that's more recent and is going to be a little bit more of an oomph to the employer is what you really want to focus on sharing. So that's where you'll have to think a little bit strategically about, what is going to be important, what's going to stand out, what's going to get them to want to move on to reading my cover letter, and of course then talking to you in an interview, because they're going to call you, right?
Yes. Yeah, and I didn't mention accomplishments, honors, projects, study abroad. Study abroad would definitely go under education. And there's a couple different ways to put that on there. You could also include special scholarships if there was a scholarship that you had to do some work for. Just make sure you're really thinking about the relevance of whatever you're trying to put on your resume. Great question. Chris, if they didn't graduate while it was called O'Neill, would you recommend still calling it O'Neill?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that question? I was sending a message.
That's okay. If they graduated when the school was not called the O'Neill School, would they still call it O'Neill on their resume?
Ooh, so this is where it always gets very touchy. So the thing is, for Carrie and I, we have to say O'Neill School. We are employees with O'Neill. Moving forward, it's going to be more known as O'Neill. So that's something to keep in mind, that, it is a named school. If they're Googling it and they're looking just for SPIA or School of Public and Environmental Affairs, they might get confused if they see O'Neill and it's not on your resume. So it's not, it's a personal document. You can put it together how you would like to. But I would keep in mind that there's potential confusion if they're seeing a discrepancy.
That was a good question.
It is a good question.
All right. So moving into experience, Chris, do you want to cover this one?
Oh man, sure. No, absolutely happy to. We talk about these all the time. So experience, there are a couple of ways that you can do them, first of all. So you'll see here that there's a relevant experience section as the demo one. So think very carefully about what experience you have and how it's going to best present to the employer. So of course you need to include, where the heck did you work? What is that organization called? Where was that organization located? You would be surprised how often people put things on their resumes that make no sense based on locations included. Be very honest on your resume, don't lie. It's kind of amazing how many ways people do. But include your title of your position, and keep in mind that some organizations call things different ways. So that's why you'll have to think about, maybe a career advisor where we are is a career coach somewhere else. And so maybe you have to explain a little bit more of what specifically it means to be in that role. And your dates of employment. You do not have to put month, day, year. It is very unusual that you would have to put month, day, year, but I will say federal employment will sometimes ask for that. Typically you can do month and year or just years, as you can see in this example. So you don't have to get into all that detail. Make sure that you choose a way that you want to emphasize information and use that consistently. Please, please, please focus on consistency. I know people get really annoyed when I tell them there's a space here and this is bold and this is not. That matters on your resume because this is your first impression of you as a professional to the organization. So really look for those details, have somebody else look at it. I'm sure we've all had that experience where we've read something over and over and over. I just had this the other day where I had an extra word in the title of an email and felt real silly after I sent it, but I read that email like 5 times and didn't catch it because I wrote it, and we get too used to it and we skip things. Have other people look at your resume to see that. But bold, italics, caps are ways that you can emphasize information. Do not overuse them though. If everything is in caps, I feel yelled at. If everything is in bold, there's no way that everything is the most important thing for me to read. So now I don't know what you're trying to tell me is most important. So think about those things. Make sure that your information is in reverse chronological order. So the most recent experience should come first, and work your way backwards. And then definitely recommend bullet points to highlight the information about what you did. And keep in mind that this is not focused on telling a job description. This is focused on telling your accomplishments inside of that job. So it will include things that you did, because we have to know that to know how you accomplish something, but it should be accomplishment oriented. What do you have to add there, Carrie?
I was just going to add, there is a question in the chat about employers no longer being in business, and how to include that on the resume. Chris, you might think differently. I'll give my advice first. I would leave it the same. So leave the title of the company, the location, they're not necessarily going to look that closely at it and then go do research to see if it's actually located in Indianapolis or wherever it was located. And then if they question you about it in the interview, that's something that you can bring up, that they're no longer in business. If you feel like it will draw negative attention to you somehow, that's also something that you can discuss in a cover letter a little bit more in detail if you'd like to. Chris, do you have a different thought?
To touch on this. So my last job before I worked at IUPUI, the company closed. so I'm 100% in this situation for any future employment opportunities I would look for or for advancements inside of IUPUI. The experience that I had is still incredibly valuable. It is the kind of it's where I started working in career advising. It's how I built my base of what I know now. So even though they're not in business, there are still ways that people can verify that employment. There are records that you worked there, right? So like you've submitted tax returns and you can verify that you were employed there. Now actually calling there to confirm is probably not so much an option anymore. But it's possible that somebody in that organization would still be a reference for you. And if they don't have that information on your resume, they're probably going to be confused if they're getting this reference for something not on there. So just because they closed does not mean that you cannot include that information. I assure you that my closed experience is 100% staying on my resume because it's extremely relevant to what I do now.
I knew you'd have something to say on that one.
Of course, I know that.
Yes. So there's another question about recommended number of bullet points on a resume. I usually recommend 2 to 5 good quality bullet points. And when I say quality, we'll talk about how to put together a really good bullet point. That will take the most amount of work for you. But you want to make sure you're giving more bullet points to the experiences that are more relevant to the job that you're applying for. I have a lot of people who will, for example, break up the resume between relevant experience and other experience. So a couple of reasons why you would do that is so that they see relevant experience first at the top of the resume. That's when they're going to catch the most information. But then other experience to explain like gaps in employment if you did something in between 2 relevant jobs or something like that. But the other experiences probably only need about 2 bullet points. The relevant should have more like 3, 4, maybe even 5 bullet points. And they should be pretty full of like the skills and accomplishment statements, not just job duties. And we'll talk about second or third pages in just a couple of minutes. We'll cover that, and yeah, we'll cover it. Let's see. So bullet points. Like I said, this is going to take the most amount of time, most likely on your resume. You should be putting the most amount of work into the bullet points because these are what they're actually looking at to see what you've done, what your experience is. And again, I want to highlight that you should absolutely put in skills and accomplishments and achievements. So instead of just trying to describe what you did on that job, try to highlight the things that you did that were different than what other people might have done at that job. Things that you improved, processes, things like that. That's going to speak a lot louder to an employer than just job duties. So don't just list out your job responsibilities. Make sure you're really thinking about the things that you've accomplished in your job and include that in the resume. And again, it should start with action verbs. You don't want to start with I or we or anything like that. First person's implied. So make sure you're really looking at those strong action verbs as well. So making sure that your action verb is describing the skill that you're trying to get them to understand that you have. And it's also okay to talk about impact. So anytime that you can quantify information on a resume, that's helpful as well. So if you improved a process by 5%, make sure you put that in the resume. Or if you supervised 10 employees, make sure you tell them it was 10 employees, not just supervised employees. Because that's going to tell them the scope of the work that you were doing and give them just a little bit more detail. And if you noticed on this example back here, these are pretty full bullet points, so they take up a lot of space. We'll talk about white space and things like that. But that gives us enough detail that you guys could probably determine what I do at my job and at my former job. Common mistakes, just make sure you're checking your grammar. You don't really need titles and dates within the bullet points. That should obviously be up above in the when you're just telling them what the company is and how long you've been there. Some people will just not include action verbs at all. So make sure that you're really using strong action verbs. Make sure you're also using the correct verb tense. So going back to this example, you'll see in my previous experience, they are all in past tense because I'm not working there anymore. And then in my current job, they are in current present tense action verbs. So make sure you're really looking at those as well and changing those as needed. Consistency is important. So you'll be surprised at the number of people who look at resumes that closely and will catch that kind of thing as well. So just make sure you're staying consistent through the whole resume. And another mistake is just like vague statements, like keeping it very vague, not really telling me what you actually do at your job. That's really frustrating to an employer because I have no idea why you would have applied to this job if you're just going to tell me very vaguely what you did. Would you want to list certifications that predate? So that's a great question. Go ahead, Chris.
I would say that depends on relevancy. So if it's something that you think is going to set you apart or that medical knowledge would be really helpful, maybe that's important to include, but and you're probably going to find a lot of our answers are going to be it depends. But thinking very strategically, will that knowledge, will that experience, will that somehow contribute to why you would be somebody that would be pulled through to an interview?
Yeah, so in that example, if you were applying to a specific job that's in a medical facility, maybe not medical assistant, but you think it would be helpful, then yes, include it. If it's somewhere not even related to medicine, then no. Just because you have the certification does not mean it needs to go on the resume. So I pulled up this. This is a very basic example of skills-based bullet points. If you're a more seasoned alumni, you probably won't be including your landscaping experience from when you were in high school. But if you're still a relatively new alumni, there might be experiences that you want to still include. So if you see the first 3 bullet points are very vague and very short. So just talk with customers to find out what they wanted done. Sure, that tells me what you were doing, but it doesn't really tell me what kind of skills that you were using or what kind of experience customers might have had when they worked with you specifically. So we would revise that to say something like interacted frequently. So that tells me you work with customers a lot. With customers to determine their needs. So I know that you are working to determine some kind of need of the customer so you can create a solution, which might imply problem solving. And then the value statement to create a customer-focused landscape design project. So that tells me why I should care that you are interacting frequently with customers. So as you're going through your bullet points on your resume, make sure you're really asking yourself, why should my employer or why should this person look at my resume and care that I was doing this thing? And if you can't determine that, I would take it off and try a different bullet point, try to highlight a different skill. Some advice that I heard a couple years ago that I think is really fantastic is remember that you're trying to get an interview with your resume, right? And everything on your resume is fair game, so they can ask you about it in the interview. If you cannot talk about your bullet point for 3 to 5 minutes each, so one bullet point, 3 to 5 minutes, then take it off your resume. It's probably not as relevant as you think it is. If you can talk about an experience with that one bullet point for that amount of time, then yes, it should absolutely go on your resume. So if you're questioning it, that's a good question to ask yourself. I keep forgetting that I have to switch the slides. Sorry. Okay. And then accomplishment statements, just really drilling it home to you. If you're a formula person, if it's helpful to know what kind of formula you should use to put your bullet points in, I think this is really helpful. Always start with that strong action verb and make sure that's describing some sort of skill. There are lots of resources. If you just Google action verbs for resumes, that will give you an entire list of action verbs to use. If you're struggling with words, sometimes I know it's a thing I struggle with, so make sure you start there. Then you want to add on the job responsibilities, but add that on with the personal accomplishments. So don't just list the job responsibility, also add accomplishments. And then at the very end, make sure you're giving like the purpose or the results of you doing that thing. So that's a value statement. So it will tell me why I should care. So this example up here, developed marketing materials and then using Adobe InDesign. So that's a good way to like highlight specific hard skills if you have experience using different products on the computer and things like that. That's helpful to know too. And then it's to promote the Office of Student Employment. So that tells me why you were doing the marketing materials in the first place. Chris, anything to add to bullet points or accomplishment statements?
So, I mean, I think you pretty well covered that, but, you know, make sure that they are, of course, staying focused on what that position is and really take a look into that job description to know that you are matching what they are looking for. Because one of the other mistakes, and I can't recall if we're going to get into that in a little bit, but one of the big mistakes is people talking about the bulk of what they did rather than focusing on the things that directly relate to that job. So even though maybe you spend all day on email, well, maybe you don't want to say I spend all day on email, focus on the things that are actually going to emphasize that you can do whatever this job is that you're going for.
Yes. And I recommend like pulling up the job description that you're applying for and seeing what kind of action verbs they're using in that description as well. And if you can highlight those same action verbs, that's going back to using those keywords in your resume so that a computer will catch them. If it's in the job description, it should probably also be in your resume. So make sure you're looking at that really closely and highlighting what you have done in those experiences.
And keep in mind, computers, even though they seem smart, are not that smart. So if it says that they are looking for project management experience, you cannot put managed projects. You need to have project management as your phrase. So look for those words that really go together so that you make sure the computer knows you are trying to tell them exactly what they're looking for.
Yes. In the current example, let me read this. Software use is mentioned as an accomplishment. What are the benefits of having a section on software? Yeah, we'll talk about that in just a second. It's actually a different section that you might include if it's specific software that you're trying to highlight. But using it in the accomplishment statements is helpful for them to know in the context that you were using software. So that kind of gives them a little bit more context. You can also just list it in a different section though as well. So we'll talk about how to do that too. So just putting it in the accomplishment is just context. I'll talk about other sections. So you might pick up your resume into other sections if you have experience in other areas. So honors and awards are always something really nice to include. If you've been awarded something at your current job, you want to make sure you highlight that for the person looking at your resume. If you're still a fairly new alumni, freshly graduated, student and professional organizations are still really awesome things to include on your resume, especially if you have that leadership experience. Volunteer activities too, for seasoned or new professionals. Some companies really value volunteering, so seeing that on your resume can be super helpful. And you're also gaining skills from those experiences as well. So don't sell those things short just because you're not getting paid for that. And you would set that up the same as if you would set it up as a paid opportunity. Make sure you list your title, even if it was just volunteer. Or if you had a leadership role, make sure you highlight that as well. Include the organization, the dates that you were there. It would look exactly the same as the other experiences. And then you can also add accomplishment statements to those as well. If they're further down on your resume, 1 or 2 bullet points is probably okay. You don't want to overload too much on the end part of your resume. So just to give an example of like an other section, if you are on committees for your current job and you do specific things for that, that's a great section to include. And that might be leadership roles as well. So make sure you look at what else you're doing at your job rather than just your actual normal job duties. So I serve on a lot of committees, so this section is actually much longer than what you see here. But I put this here as an example so you can see there's about 2 bullet points under each committee just to showcase what I'm doing as part of those committees. So you still want to make sure you're including your title for that, especially with the leadership position, and add bullet points if you're heavily involved in those things. So if you're doing a lot of work for that committee, make sure you let them know that. However, don't include activities where you have little to no involvement. So most often it's with students who maybe joined a student organization and went to one meeting and then never went again, but they still included it on their resume. That's not super helpful because you didn't really do anything for that. So make sure you're including the things that you're actually gaining skills from. So skills section, so this is where the software question might come in. A lot of people will include a skills section on their resume, and that's literally just a section that says skills and then listed out the skills. So I want to highlight that these are on your resume to display like uncommon skills. So languages, software, specialized industry skills, things like that. It's not a place to put like soft skills of any kind or personal characteristics, anything like that. A lot of times people will put the skills section on and have things like good team worker or reliable, things like that. That's not what the skills section is for, and it's not super helpful on a resume. So make sure you're using that specifically for uncommon skills that you want to highlight. And then just a note, references should not be included on your resume. If the employer is looking for references, they will ask you for them, and it would actually be a completely separate document that you would submit with your resume. So make sure if you have that reference section, you just take it off, save the space for some other things. Chris, do you want to add anything to other sections?
Not specifically there. There was a question about length of resumes, and so I wanted to touch really quickly. Are we talking about running resumes in a little bit? Is that something?
Well, we have a slide about going onto the second page, but
okay.
We can talk about it now if you'd like.
Okay. Well, we can do it with the 2-page part. So just know we'll talk about running resumes in a little bit.
Okay. I guess it's coming up here. So I like to just present a whole resume and just general tips for how a resume should look. This is a student example, so it might not be as relevant to some of you, but I'll show mine in just a second as well. We recommend for anyone to try to keep your resume at 1 page. And that's just because the employer may not even make it to a second or even a 3rd page. They are looking at it so quickly that they're going to catch all this information that's at the front of the resume. And they might even just stop before they get to the 2nd page. So remember that they're looking at it so fast. Whatever's on your 2nd page, if you want them to know about it, find a way to include it on that 1st page or don't include it at all. So that's the relevancy piece helps because you don't need to include all of your experiences most of the time. So make sure you're only including the relevant projects or experiences that you have. So if you have to go onto the 2nd page, we'll talk about that in just a second. And then Chris will talk about running resumes. But generally speaking, try to get it to 1 page. Remember that it should be easy to read and it should be easy to skim. So you'll notice that this student has a bunch of bullet points, which is really nice for me to go through and just pick out information really fast. This class projects might be a little hard to get information from since there's a little bit of a sentence in the beginning, but it might still work. Make sure you're using bold and italics, just like we said. Don't overuse it, but use it to highlight some things that might be important for that job. Font size is usually pretty important. So if you're running out of space and you're adjusting your font size to be smaller, you typically don't want to go less than like a 10 or 11 point font, depending on what you're using, just because then it gets too difficult to read. And then I also recommend using just a very basic font. So Times New Roman is usually pretty good. Anything that's just really easy to read. If you get into some of those funky, fun-looking resumes that have different fonts, it's hard to pick information out of there and it's too distracting to actually get the information from. So make sure you're just using very basic fonts for your resume. If you want a little bit of personalization, I always encourage it in your heading with your name and your information. Again, don't go too crazy, but you can kind of adjust some fonts on there as well. Margins are also a big thing for a lot of people, so make sure you're using 0.5 or 1 inch margins. If you get too much smaller than that, it looks a little too cramped. White space is also kind of an interesting part of a resume. So I always give the example, if you're gonna like print out your resume, fold it in half like hamburger style, and then fold it in half again, what I say, hot dog style, both ways. So you have 4 quadrants. Each quadrant should have the same amount of text or color in it. So just to make it like an easy, readable, appealing looking document. If you're questioning that, the folding technique is pretty good. I think that's all that I wanted to cover in this one. Yes. Okay. So my resume is 2 pages because I do have a lot of experience. So remember though that anything you put on that second page, they may not see. So you want to make sure that everything that is relevant is on the first page. If you have to go to the second page, there's a couple of things you want to make sure that you do. Make sure that you're starting at least a completely new section. So don't try to, like my teaching experience, if I couldn't get that university college on and it bumped to the second page, you don't want to start your second page with that. You want to just make sure it starts with a whole new section category. So you might have to change the spacing up at the top as well. So just make sure you're doing that. And then if you're gonna go on the second page, at least make it to a page and a half. So fill up at least half of the second page. You don't ever want to go like 1 or 2 lines onto the second page. So make sure you're filling it, or at least filling it halfway if you're going to do that. Chris, do you want to talk about running resumes?
Sure. So a running resume is really just a document where you are going to put all the information you possibly could think of onto that document. So it'll be structured like your resume just for the sake of simplicity. But we have a couple of people on this call who are referencing having experience going back 20 years. It can be very hard to remember all the accomplishments that you had back then, particularly if you are including the data that we mentioned, because it is so helpful if you can say you increased efficiency by 10% or something like that. So a running resume is really just an ongoing record. This can get as long as you want because you're never actually going to send it to anybody. But then when a job comes up that something you did 15 years ago is super applicable, you can go back, pull out the bullet points that make sense for that, adjust them if you need to, and put them into a new document that is ready to send for this specific opportunity, so that you can put that best foot forward and have the most relevant information that they need to know. So I definitely recommend, if you haven't done that, I wish I had been told that when I was in college. I was not. But it is something that I strongly recommend everybody does, because it is so, it just takes so much time to put those bullet points together. So do it one time, keep building on it, and then pull that information out as it becomes relevant for your search.
And I will also add, if you have a lot of experience that you'd like to highlight, that's a great opportunity to also include your LinkedIn profile and make sure your LinkedIn includes all of your experience as well. Because someone might look through your resume and think it looks really impressive, and then also do the additional work to go look at your LinkedIn profile with even more information. So if you have a ton of experience and you think it's all really important, go ahead and include it on your LinkedIn and include the link on your resume as well. Yeah, because most employers are not really interested in reading a super long resume, and it completely depends on who's looking at it. Some people won't look at it at all if it's super long. Some might give it the first page and then be done, and that you just never know who's looking at your resume. So it's easier to stay on the safe side and keep it short and concise than going on to another page or even a third page. Relevancy is important. That will help you cut it down a lot.
There was a question about keywords. I don't know if you want to touch on that now.
Oh, yes. So like I said, keywords in general, the computer scanning will be looking for those keywords. So that's where you can use those action verbs. Make sure you're using the same ones that are in the job descriptions. A really I'm going to explain this horribly, Chris, so make sure like you cover it if I don't do it well. A nice tip if you're curious about what keywords the job might be searching for is to go to one of those word cloud generating websites. They're free. You can just Google search it. You'll find something. And copy and paste the job description that you're interested in applying for into the word cloud generator. And you'll notice if there's different words that are repeated several times throughout that job description, those are obviously going to be bigger in that word cloud. So you want to make sure you definitely include those in there. But if you're struggling to know what keywords are important, that's a good way, a good little trick to find out what those jobs are actually looking for and what you definitely should be including on that resume.
It sounds silly, but it does work and it's super easy.
Yes, it does work. It's really nice to use in a pinch. If you're like, I don't want to read through this whole job description and get all the keywords, that's a good way to kind of do that. Does that cover it? Anything else you want to cover on keywords, Chris?
I mean, that's definitely overall. Are you referencing ONET while we're talking today?
I wasn't going to, but we can.
So I will put a link into the chat, but ONET is a resource that is put together based off of information collected by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. It is not a perfect resource, and I always like to add that caveat. It has somewhere around 1,000 different job descriptions that are included in it, so that by no means covers every job that exists. But if you can find something that is close to what you are hoping to do, there is a task list that is included in there, and it is structured very much like you would structure a bullet point in a resume. They typically start with an action verb and then they go into some sort of statement about what somebody in that role does. So if you are struggling to think of what kind of things you should be sharing, reading through that task list can be really helpful, especially if you're thinking about experiences from a long time ago. I find that when we are in positions, we tend to forget how much we had to learn when we started it, and we start thinking, oh, it's not that hard. Like, I just do what I do every day. So sometimes when you actually read through a description of what somebody in that role does, it can help things come to your mind and go, oh my gosh, I absolutely counsel people on this, or advise this, or edit, or whatever it is that you do. Sometimes reading through those points can help you think about what's transferable, or just what things you really should be focusing on emphasizing. But I will pull a link to ONET and put that in the chat.
Thank you. And one note I wanted to say about the second page, make sure you do create a little header so that if for some reason the employer still prints out a resume and it gets misplaced, they can see who it belongs to. So just make sure you have that. You could also copy and paste your same header onto the second page. That's totally personal preference of how you want your resume to look. Again, just really make sure you're checking your grammar issues. There are some people who will throw out a resume for one grammar mistake, and you don't want that to be the reason that your resume gets thrown out, especially if you're a really strong candidate for that position. So just make sure that you're using the right spellings of words, your, like all of those kind of contractions, things like that. Make sure you're double checking those if you're using those. Even in your cover letter, make sure you double check that as well. And subject to verb agreement, just like I said, make sure it's in past present tense or whatever you're trying to get it to. Yes, because there are people who will throw that out just because of a grammar issue. So sometimes they're looking for just the tiniest mistake so that they can cut their pool down farther quickly. So just double check it, have other people double check it. Sometimes you're looking at it and you know what it's supposed to say, so it looks right to you. Where having someone else look at it will help you catch those issues too. And that's all that we have to cover. So we can open it up to some more questions. I know we've had quite a few in the chat, but feel free to fire away at us. I know there are also some more experienced people in here. So if there's other tips or things that you guys have heard, we're happy to talk about those as well.
I'm sure you've seen we've had some help from someone who joined, Andrea. If you would like to provide any insight as well, we are happy to hear from you too.
Yeah. So this is Andrea Maslicki. I was one of the first SPIA graduates, 77 environmental studies, 79 MPA in environmental policy. So I've had a long history of hiring mainly in the scientific and technical areas. So I just want to emphasize some of the stuff that had been said today. The first one is that computers read resumes, not people. So just can't say that enough. Make sure you're hitting those keywords that are in the requisition. The second one is that you need a separate resume for every single job that you apply for. So just don't think that, oh, I've got this resume, now I'm going to use it for every job. No, 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 no. You know, you need to be looking at that requisition. You need to be seeing what it says that they want, and you need to tailor your resume again for those keywords for that position. And then my final thing is that as a hiring manager, I really like to see skills up front. That's what I recommend, especially for entry-level people where you may not have a lot of experience. But if you've done modeling, if you've done report writing, if you're really good with Excel, if you have MATLAB, as I think I use as an example, I think it's really good to put your skills that correspond, again, to the job that you're applying for up front in your resume so they can go check, check, check. So those are my three biggest tips to people. I guess I have one more, which is that if you're graduating and you're applying for a job, environmental scientist is a familiar one for me, but any job, go out in the web. Go look at all the jobs that you can find for environmental scientists, regardless of whether they're entry level or mid-level. And then what I do, much like that tool that you talked about, I just cut and paste them into a Word document, right? So I'm out there going, oh, here's an environmental scientist job from this, from that. And now I have a whole Word document with maybe 6 or 7 environmental scientist jobs. And then I can look at it, same thing, and start to look at what things that are common to what they're asking for. So those are my 4 tips as a hiring manager.
Andrea, thank you so much for your input, and I apologize for mispronouncing your name.
No worries.
I'm so sorry. People do it to me all the time, but I hate doing it. One other thing I didn't mention that I always like to talk about, and it's actually from a specific resource. Her name is Terry Shodine, if you're interested. But when you're putting together your resume, really think about what is the most important thing for them to know about you first, and put that first and work your way backwards. There's this tendency when you're familiar with novels or just kind of like general interesting reading, kind of casual reading, to pack that punch at the end, but you really need to grab them at the beginning and give them a reason to keep reading. So make sure the first thing is super relevant, and maybe that's your experience, maybe that's your work experience, maybe it's certain, like maybe you volunteered with the organization and that's something that you can highlight quite a bit. Could be your education, could be your skills, whatever it is that most emphasizes why you should be picked. So there is a question about translating to LinkedIn, and Carrie, you're welcome to chime in as well. But one of the things that I like to talk about with LinkedIn is, first of all, it should not be directly your resume. So if you copy and paste your resume in there, you're not really using LinkedIn for what it's there for. LinkedIn is really an opportunity to tell more of the narrative of your experience, so you can get a little bit more into detail about what you've done, but make sure you don't get too detailed, because again, people tend to have short attention spans. So we want to make sure that you're telling more of that story, but you're also doing it in a very engaging way.
Yeah, and you can absolutely start by just kind of copy and pasting your resume into LinkedIn just to get the experiences down, but then I'd go back through and give that more detail through LinkedIn. So there's a lot of other pieces to LinkedIn, like headlines and summaries and things like that too, that you would not include on a resume. And a general tip is just to make sure you're utilizing all of those sections. Make sure your headline is accurate with what you're doing currently or what you're looking for. Make sure your summary is a good indication of who you are as well. There's just so many other pieces of LinkedIn. We could have like a whole nother presentation about LinkedIn profiles. But I was just looking for a resource. There's not any that I necessarily recommend to students, but I'll look for another couple of minutes to see if there's something I can just pop in the chat real quick.
One of the other things that I just encourage to think about when it comes to LinkedIn is thinking about the things that are going to pop up in that search result. So you really want to make sure that you're going to pop up in it, but if you are looking to be somebody that they actually want to contact, it's going to be really important that you have a professional photo. Having a professional photo, I think it's like your I can't remember, that's the 7 times more likely or 15 to, it's a lot of times more likely that you'll be contacted. But make sure that your name is there. The headline is something that pops up in that initial search. So use that effectively. It's not a good practice to say looking for employment. It just sounds a little bit desperate, I guess is kind of what I've heard people say. But you also can use it as more of an opportunity than just saying currently employed with. Talk about try to put something in there about what you can do. So if you have increased efficiency, if you are good at developing reports, whatever that thing is, try to put something in there that would intrigue somebody to actually click on your profile and read more about your experience.
I'm dropping 2 just websites that I found really quickly on LinkedIn if you're interested in creating a good LinkedIn profile. My last tip, if you are actively job searching and you're interested in recruiters recruiting you, make sure that you update your headline to seeking opportunities or something like that. Turn that on. I think it gives it a different kind of filter for recruiters. My husband was job searching for a long time and didn't want to change that section to actively searching because he didn't want his job boss to know that he was job searching. But as soon as he turned it on, it was like recruiters were in his inbox like immediately. So if you're actively job searching and want to use LinkedIn for that, make sure you let them know that you are actively looking.
Another thing that doesn't pop up in the search, but does pop up for recruiters is industry. So make sure, I think it's something like 100 options or something for your industry. So make sure you carefully select that. You can only choose one, but it's only viewed on the recruiter side. So keep that in mind. And then I think we had something that came into the.
Yes, I'm typing it, but I will also.
Oh, Andrea, yes. I highly recommend get your resume out there somewhere publicly. If people have the ability to search for your resume, then your resume can be working for you when you're not working on it, which is a beautiful situation. Why work harder than you have to? But that's where really spending time thinking about what are those keywords that you need to know. The other nice thing is if you have your resume out there publicly and you start getting bites that just seem really off base, that could also be an indicator that maybe you don't have quite the correct words on there and you need to actually switch up what you have on there. So keep that in mind, that it can also be a resource just to see if you need to adjust what you have, what message you have out there. Now I should add the caveat, there are certain industries that will contact you no matter what, which tends to be like the business to business sales. So don't take that personally.
And I will just, Laura asked about PDF or Word form when sending a resume anyway. I always recommend saving your resume as a PDF before you send it anywhere, before you submit it on an online application. PDF versions will make sure that your formatting does not get messed up on someone else's computer. If they're using some kind of different software or anything like that, PDF will always stay the same. So make sure you save it as a PDF before you send it or submit it anywhere. And when you save it, make sure you save it with your name. So save it like Carrie Lay resume or something like that, so that it's easily accessible when someone gets it virtually. But we're like right on time. So if there's any last minute questions, we're happy to field them.
Oh, we're so glad it was helpful. Thank you for coming.
And I know you're always available, quick tips or anything like that. So we're happy to help.
Yeah, and if you see any of our like public presentations that we're hosting, we leave those open. You are welcome to join us, even if it says it's for students. If there is a link out there and you want to come see what's happening, please join us. We are happy to have you. Yeah, the more the merrier. We're happy to share, and questions like the ones that you're bringing to the table really add to the conversation anyway. So we super appreciate that you're helping us deliver a better message and something more applicable for you.
Hey, Emily, I have a really nice kind of like resume tip sheet. If I send it to you, could you send it to everyone who was here today?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I can get that out.
I forgot I wanted to get that to them. Sorry.
Well, thanks everybody. I think this is the end of the session. If you have any additional questions, like Chris and Carrie said, just feel free to reach out. You can fire them to me too if that's easier. Relay them. Have a great afternoon. Thanks.
Thank you.